Hello, everybody. Yes. If you start people clapping for you, they'll clap for you, right? It's always it's a real honor to be here and be together each week. And so we're continuing a series that really centers on our mission, why it is that we do. And obviously, this weekend's holiday weekend. A lot of people are here from out of town and different places. And so you'll get to hear sort of some insight into where we've been and why we do some of the things that we do. But before we do, I think it's important to recognize what holiday it is. We are thinking about where we're going to be cooking out tomorrow, going to the beach or today or whatever it is that we're doing. And we also sort of recognize the tension of that we are going to be enjoying a lot of great freedoms and things that are afforded to us that came at a great sacrifice. And that's one of the tensions that we live in. We know there are a lot of men and women in our congregation who either serve, they have friends, family members who have paid the ultimate price, sacrifice for our freedoms. And so I think it's wholly appropriate that we just pause and remember that sacrifice that affords us the kind of freedoms to enjoy, but also the responsibility that we have to be good stewards of that freedom. And I just think it's a great way for us to reflect on, maybe take some time tomorrow to reflect on the tension that this particular holiday presents to us. And so today we're going to be turning our attention to sort of the second central part of the mission. Now, most people in our church today have come into this location in this building. And so we've had air conditioning and comfortable seats and parking. And that sounds like you should always have that, but that wasn't always the case. We started Port City Community Church in a home originally, and then multiple different locations, but eventually Rolling Rice Middle School, which is in the middle of town. And Rolling Rice Middle School had an auditorium that sat 720 people. It had these wooden, creaky chairs. There's some upstairs. We actually asked them, and they gave us permission to take them. We didn't just steal them. Gave us permission to take them, but we have them. And every time people would stand up, they made this crazy noise. And I remember, we're here now because you walk in and there's people greeting you and there's all kinds of things happening. We have great organization. And I can say that because I don't have anything to do with it. They keep me out of that stuff. But we have great organization. We have great people who work day in, day out, week in, week out, volunteer staff to make this what it is. But it was not always like this. And people walk in here and think that we're just executing on this organization, this strategic plan that we had 25 years ago. But that was not how this began. Most of those early days, really up until about 10 years in, you're just sort of hanging on, hoping that you'll be around the next week. It was always on the verge of failure. It felt like it was always on the verge of collapse. It felt like we were barely hanging on to what was happening. And in fact, in the earliest days, we had a service at 10 o'clock. And no one came at 10 o'clock. We always have these big intros we're going to do. So we'd stand backstage and we're like lean out the curtain like, all right, nobody's here yet. We'll start. And we got the curtain because we're going to open the curtain like there's something happening. So like 9 people in there when we started. And this is what it was like. You get there's like 3 people over here and 2 people back there, and you would hope that the person sitting by themselves, like, oh, please let somebody talk to them, or I'm going to go over there and talk to them. It was just always this sort of this struggle. But I remember really, really just personally, and what kept me going was the mission. It was always this sense that we could be helpful. That somehow something we were doing would matter to someone coming in the doors in such a way that would change what they saw, and then out of that maybe change the trajectory of their lives. And I remember, the very early days writing this sentence. It'll be on the screen, on a napkin, on a piece of paper. It's in tons of documents. It's in tons of my journals to reach people and to help them walk with God. And in the early days, it just friendly to we want to get people to come into our building. We want to try to extend ourselves and help them, do a quiet time and learn about the Bible and all those things. But over 25 years, this has deepened in ways that I never imagined it would. Last week we talked about this, right? We talked about the fact that reach isn't just how we get people to come into our doors. It's not a plan to grow. It's a measure of what we're willing to care about. It helps. It's a challenge to the formation of our hearts. What are we willing to extend ourselves towards for the sake of reaching into places? And this is a really challenging thing for us to cultivate compassion. And this week is to talk about help. It's so funny because you think that when you're starting, you're going to be doing something for other people, and then 25 years in, you realize how being a part, my involvement in this church has changed and shaped the trajectory of my life. The things that I have received and been helped in my own relationship with Christ, I could not begin to express. And you just realize how this all begins to work together. You know, I was 29 years old when we started Port City Church, and I was learning a lot, and I honestly thought that if I could learn enough, I thought by the time I was 35, I would have learned all the biblical principles on all the big issues. And I would have my sort of little holsters that I could just pull, and just any issue, pull some Bible verses out. We could just, solve any problem like vanilla ice, right? If there's a problem, I'll solve it. We'll just pull out some verses and we'll solve it all. And because that's how you think. And a lot of you grew up, that's how the church worked for you, right? You came to church because you needed help and you would get some principle and you apply it to your life. Like that's how we thought about this. And what's happened as I've been reading and studying and praying and walking with the people who are around me and the community that we've been able to build here, the box is disintegrated. And this became something very different than what I anticipated it would be. And I've become something different than what I anticipated that I would be. And what you realize is that everything isn't going to be fixed. Everything isn't going to change. Some things are not going to change. And it's how do you have hope and how do you stay helpful in those kinds of places? And that becomes the challenge of the church. To be honest, it's actually easy to give out some good advice about some things and give people. It's much more difficult to stay and be helpful and to bring some measure of longing and hopefulness when people are facing circumstances that aren't going to be different or aren't going to change. And this to me is where the depth of our vision and our mission gets pressed. And I remember writing this down for the first time, where it came from. Like I have very vivid memories about the first time I thought about this idea of helping people walk with God. And it came from this passage in the book of Colossians chapter 1, and we'll look at this, and I'm going to read the whole thing. We're going to talk about it together. But what I want for us to do, because a lot of us come in here, most all of us come in here, we have some perspective of what the church should be and what the church should do, or how things, whatever it might be, how things should be or how people should do things. And we don't have we don't tolerate very well anything different than that. And I don't mean just tolerate like we want to like argue against it. I mean we don't tolerate it in the sense that we rarely hear beyond what we already think we know. And so I want us to push, because I want for us to understand how important this is for all of us to really adopt a posture of being helpful. So here's the passage in Colossians chapter 1, starting in verse 9. And so Paul's heard about the work that God's been doing in the people in this little town. And so he's writing this to them. He says, hey, for this reason, I've heard about this work, I've heard of your faithfulness. Since this reason, the day we've heard of it, we have not ceased to pray for you and to ask that you may be filled with all knowledge of his will. So Paul's saying, I want you to know what God's intentions are, right? He wants us to know, to be filled with the knowledge of his will in all spiritual wisdom and understanding. In other words, this doesn't just stay ethereal. Like there's a wisdom. To me, it's the reason I keep a journal. It's the reason we try to put language to things. It's the reason we try to stay and look because we want to understand what God is doing, what his work looks like in us, in our particular place. And this requires wisdom, and it requires understanding, it requires the work of this. And the reason he's praying, he says, I want you to know what God's intent, so that, and here's where it came from, so that you will walk in a manner worthy of the Lord. And I love that picture because it was just this idea of moving in and through our lives in a manner that is worthy of the Lord. And then he gives us this list. Number one, he says, to please him in all respects, that God would be pleased with us. We want to walk in a way that would elicit a smile from God. That you would walk in a way that elicits God's pleasure over your life. Do you know how you do that? What most of us end up thinking is that God would be pleased with us if we behaved ourselves better. And that's not at all how God reveals himself to us. Do you know what pleases God? Do you know what pleases him about you and about me? It's our trust. It's our faith. It's faith. It's your willingness to say, God, I don't know how this is going, I'm not sure, but I'm going to step into this believing or trusting. God smiles on those things. I think sometimes he laughs because of our acts of faith. We're like, what are they doing, right? But he does this. And we have to see this about God. We have to see him as this kind of God who calls us to himself to walk in this way. To number two, he says to bear fruit, right? Our lives are to be like, let's put some little apples on there, right? Our lives are to bear fruit. There's a beauty to what we do, to bear fruit in everything that we do, to bear fruit. And you realize that God could have made fruit just sprout out of the ground like a grocery store. You can just walk by and get 9 or 10 things, but instead it takes a lot of land and a lot of time. But if you've ever been through like orchards or places where it's beautiful, like the fruit on these trees is beautiful, and you pick it off of the tree and it nourishes you. This is the picture that we're supposed to have. That somehow the work of our lives bears fruit. There's a beauty to the things that we bring to bear on the world, and it nourishes the world around us. It brings something beneficial to the world around us. Bearing fruit in every good work and increasing and knowing him. And what he means is not knowing about him, but knowing him relationally. We are strengthened with all power. Now we're talking. Strengthened with all power according to his glorious might. Why? So we can do what needs to be done. He strengthens us with his power to do what? To be steadfast and to be patient. You know what that means? That means that people are going to be so difficult that it takes God's power to put up with them. You ever thought about that? That's what it means. That's what he's asking. That we would joyously. We were here in Wilmington, and Taya was leading us, and she just talks about singing about God's salvation. Just allows joy to emerge, to joyously give thanks to the Father who has qualified us. This is really important. He doesn't put up with you. He qualified you to share in what he's intended, this inheritance of the saints in light. And then he has this, for he rescued us from the domain of darkness, and he transferred us into the kingdom of the Son. These words are words of rule and of reign. The kingdom of his beloved Son, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sin. So that passage has continued to drive so much of what I think God has been teaching us and is teaching us and what we are called to do as a church. And we have been rescued from a dominion of darkness that covers and conceals and allows us to hide. It operates in those kinds of ways. And we've been moved into the kingdom of his beloved Son, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sin, that there's something that comes out of us in this place of light, this shared inheritance in the saints of light, where we are seen and known. And so this is the picture, and we have to get acclimated to that way of life, because we don't do that naturally. We don't do that quickly. We need tremendous help in this. In fact, Paul would talk about this rescue needs to be worked out. And he says it like this in Philippians chapter 2. He says that we are to work out your salvation with fear and trembling. There's a seriousness to it. There's a soberness to it. It's to work out this rescue, because it is God who works in you to will and to act according to what? What he intends, his good intention for your life and for mine. God intends goodness to come from our lives. So that's what I want for us to start minding. We're helping people towards that, and we need desperate help in this, right? We tend to think that we shouldn't need anything from anybody else, and if we do, right, we're doing something wrong. But you realize none of you are here without tremendous help from a lot of people. Right? Human beings come into the world desperate for help. You can't feed yourself. You can't do anything on your own. We've been watching shark documentaries because my granddaughter, she loves sharks. She wakes up from her nap, it's like shark, shark, shark. She's looking for sharks. So unfortunately, all like the videos that have sharks, like you watch on National Geographic, are all sharks like eating seals. And it's a little bloody, and it's like this can't be good for her. So we found like baby sharks. And it's all these little baby sharks swimming around. It's really cute. And we're watching. She goes, shark, shark. And what I learned though is that sharks, when they're born, they're on their own. Their mom gives birth and they're out. You're on your own. It's either eat or be eaten. And we're not like that. We need a lot of help. And the thing is, we sort of grow into a sense of independence, and we forget that we're actually still as desperate for help as we have always been. You know, to be helped isn't a concession. It's actually designed. We're designed as human beings to be connected to one another, to be dependent upon one another, to cooperate together, and to need one another, to be helpful. I sat down and made a list in my journal of all the things that I need help with. I need help repenting and remaining returned to Christ. I need help understanding what God is doing, and I need help applying what I understand to my life over some measure of consistency. I need help with my faith. Do you ever feel like giving up on faith or God? Anybody else besides me? I work in a church. I get all the stuff that comes in about all the churches and all the things that happen in all the churches. And sometimes you just want to quit. People say, Mike, ever want to quit? I'm like, every Saturday I want to quit. And I need help. I need help holding on to faith sometimes. I need help being faithful. I need help to struggle with disappointments and disillusionment and doubt. I need help to stay connected. It's interesting that when Jesus went away, he would send his Spirit. You know what he called his Spirit? He sent his Spirit who would be the helper, to be help, to walk with God and to live in this way. And so this is the picture of this sort of new kind of unity that God has intended for us to be. And help is not a commodity that we consume. It's interesting. I've been doing this a long time, and I remember the church grew really, really fast from like 2008, really grew fast in 6 and 7 and 8, 9, 10, 11. It grew really, really fast. And I remember there was a lot of things that were happening in my own life and just sort of wrestling with what was happening in our church because it was just, it was packed and things were just crazy. And I remember I would meet people, 2012, 13, 14, 15, I'd meet people and say, oh, we used to go to Port City. And they're talking to me. I'm like, you realize I'm still there? It's kind of like, well, we used to go to your church. And I would always like, well, what do you mean used to go? And they'll say, oh, we love Port City. We love Port City. We were having some difficulties in our marriage, and you guys helped us. I was having some difficulties in my finances, and you guys helped us. We were having difficulties with this circumstance and this job decision and this thing and that thing. I mean, you guys were so helpful to us. And I was like, we were helpful? Like, what do you mean? I realized that, oh my gosh, we've become like a help factory. Like people just, because this is how we were positioned. And what was happening is we were able to produce systems and things that could solve problems. And people were coming to us and using us for those things, and we weren't becoming a church. We weren't connecting people. And so this got me thinking, and this has been a long journey over the last 10 years trying to really understand this. But we've been doing a deep dive over the last couple years about really trying to understand Port City Church, like who are we really? And so we spent several hours going through a lot of words and ideas, and one of the things we're trying to understand, what is it we promise? What is the thing that above all else we want to do? And Rick Schaefer was talking to me about this. He's one of our pastors. And he said, Mike, whenever companies or brands or whatever, we were talking about this just to give a metaphor. They say, when you do this, we're going to promise this. What is Port City's promise? And it didn't take me a millisecond to think about this, to say this. I said, we want to be helpful. Whether there's a hurricane or a pandemic, or whether it's something that's happening in your life or your life or your life or your marriage or we want to be helpful. We want to position ourselves to be helpful. And this requires something from us that a lot of us aren't used to, because what we think help looks like isn't the same as being helpful. You can help someone and fix their problems, but to be helpful is to actually engage and do something that brings them along with us. It's a posture. It's a posture. What I began to learn is that help, the posture of helpful, the goal of being helpful, is not just to fix a problem or to solve a problem, but actually the goal is connection. The goal of being helpful is always to connect with a person and not their problem. It's to build trust and incite a willingness to believe that they could belong to something and therein become. It's a vision of seeing how people are. And this is how this whole passage unfolds, that we would walk in a manner, it's all the language is we. We'd walk in a manner worthy of the Lord, that we would bear fruit, that these things we would be nourishing to others, and more, that we would share in this inheritance we were given, that we would be together in this. So it's a connection that was missing in this, and that sent us back to do a lot of work. Proverbs chapter 20 says this: the purposes of a person's heart are deep waters. Do you know what that means? It means that you are complicated and high maintenance. That's what it means. All of us are. Deep waters means we are very complex, we're very complicated, and sometimes we're high maintenance. The purposes, the intention that God has, this will that God has, his intention for your life is deep waters. And what's required? People who have understanding to draw it out. To draw it out. We need people to help us with this, to work this out. I'm so grateful for the people in my life who saw things and worked to draw these things out with me. It's a posture that we have as we extend ourselves to one another to be helpful. Whenever people sit down with me, my first question is, how can I be helpful to you? Because I don't want to just try and come in and diagnose a problem and then try to solve it. I want to come in, I want to understand, and I want to invite them to connect and to cooperate in what needs to be done in order to achieve something much different than just fixing or solving. And this posture allows us to be helpful in ways that incite people to engage and to participate and ultimately to hope. To have some sense that what God longs to do in them isn't forsaken because of something they've done, or it's not too late, but you need to help people believe in these things. You know, my personal conviction, this is honestly why when people ask me about our mission, it's the thing that brings me the most freedom, because we only have to be helpful. And one of my convictions, sort of foundational beliefs, is that every person, has been made by God and for God. And so I'm never working, to help you walk with God, I'm never working against the way you're actually created to be. You're always working with that. In fact, St. Augustine said this 1,700 years ago. He says this, and he's writing in Old English, right? It was actually translated in Old English. It says, "Thou hast formed us," God, you have formed us to yourself. And I love this. "And our hearts are restless until they find their rest in thee." Which means no fix, no solution is ever going to bring you the restlessness that you think that it will. It might make life comfortable for a while, but there's something else going on. There's something else that we're made for, that we're meant for, that we're intended for. And so that's the direction. Our direction of being helpful is always to elicit trust, to pull people into a kind of connection so that they walk with God, to find themselves in the relationship that can actually provide what they're looking for. And that's more on that next week. So here's how I want to try to explain this. Most of us have this sort of way of thinking about things. We come in and we say, okay, there is a problem and it needs a solution. And it doesn't matter, what it is. And the first step is to always try to diagnose the problem, to figure out what is actually going on. We have all these fancy terms, and depending on what thing you're working on, It's usually in the context of relationships, or my life's not working this way. What's the problem? Am I quiet time enough? Am I not praying enough? What's the problem? Am I drinking too much? Am I losing my temper? What's the problem? We sort of get that. And what we think is that if we can just get enough information, the right strategy, right, the right principles, then what we can do is we can apply that strategy. And if we apply it correctly and consistently, bada bing, bada boom, the problem is solved. And that is great if you're working on your refrigerator or your dishwasher. Not so much if you're working on relationships, right? It doesn't matter if it's friendships, business partnerships, marriages. We deal with a lot of marriage or a lot of relationship issues, as you might imagine. And the default approach almost always is identify the problem and let's find a solution, as though there are 3 simple steps to solve it. It doesn't matter if it's business, organizations, marriage, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. This is the default approach. And the problem is relationships do not work like this. And some of you know exactly what I'm talking about because you have tried for years and years and years to solve a problem in your marriage or in a relationship. And in fact, you have solved those issues that you felt like you had, and it still hasn't changed the culture of the relationship. The reason is because relationships, marriage, is a context in which you live, not a problem that you solve. And we have to, all of our relationships are like this. They're not problems we solve, they're contexts in which we live and interact. And this model, although it's applied and applied and applied, and there's industries built off this, does not work. What we have to let go of, we think that if you can just solve the problem, then everything will be fine. And it's not. It's not. Here's why. Well, before I do that, here's why. We all have default patterns, learned behaviors. Behaviors that involved hesitation and concealing and darkness and distrust. Do you know why? Because we are pulled between 2 realms. One is the domain of darkness, where those kinds of things govern. And the other is the dominion of the kingdom of light, the Son who God loves. And it's pulled in between those 2 places. We learn this system well. The reality is if your life works at all, you know how to be effective in doing that. You know how to be effective in getting what you want. Some of you have learned that if you flex your temper, things will be like they're supposed to be. So if you've learned if you put enough money behind it, things will be like it's supposed to be. Some of you have learned if you charm enough, things will be like they want to be. Some of you have learned if you pout enough or whine enough, things will be like they want to be. And we've learned ways to be effective with getting what it is that we want in our lives. And then outside of that, once we find that, we serve to protect it. And so we're going to hold on to everything. And listen, you're going to keep looking for help to get things fixed, and it's never going to touch the thing that you actually need, which is a fundamentally different view of how you're made and how you're called and what God is longing to do in your life, His good intention and purpose for you. And this has to be worked out in the context of our rescue. That's what has to be worked out. We're always helping people towards that. The thing that changed me, and it took me, because the first 10 years, it was problem, solution, problem, solution, problem, solution. I'm like, there's something more. And I would read these passages like this. He has rescued us from the domain of darkness, and He has transferred us into the kingdom of His beloved Son. And in this kingdom, we have what? You can say it out loud. Redemption. 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 The forgiveness of sins. And what I realized is I had almost no vision for what redemption actually looked like. And what you recognize very, very quickly is that redemption is a function of relationship. Redemption is not a function of solving problems. This is why I believe that the church holds, to me, I have so much hope in the church going forward because I see most every effort from our government, and there's some great people working in government solutions and great, I know it sounds like an oxymoron, but it's actually true. There's some great things that are happening in a lot of places, but they are all driven to solve problems. And what God intends to do, and the only hope for the world is redemption. And redemption is always relational. It's always relational. What redemption is, it doesn't matter what system it is. Economic systems require redemptive relationships, right? Issues of poverty, issues of race, issues of civics and politics and all these things, they all require redemption, and it's always going to require relationships. This is the vision of shalom that God gave us in the beginning. It's to be rightly related with Him, to be rightly related to ourselves, to be rightly related with one another, and then rightly related to the world around us. It's how it's always been thought of since the very beginning. It's always relational. And that is the mechanism for redemption. The challenge to us is that we almost always, by default, think as individuals. We think individually. How am I affected by this? And here's the thing. If something doesn't affect you, it's not likely a problem for you. I remember I was talking to this couple. They came in. They were in such a bad way. And it got to the nitty gritty. Like they were arguing about stuff like the house being too cold. I mean, have you ever seen people, have you ever been in this situation where you're just arguing about everything? And she said, it's too cold. Or he said, it's not too cold. And I'm like, to you, it's not too cold, right? To you. And until it's too cold for him or her, it's not a problem. And that's how a lot of us live. Until it affects us, it's not a problem. And we need to learn to think relationally. With the kingdom of the beloved Son, it thinks relationally. And that is not how am I affected, it's how are we connected? How are we going to experience and learn and live this out? And so the thing that you'll understand, and I can't say this strongly enough, but if you are here and you struggle to trust other people, or you struggle to believe things, or you struggle to hope, more than likely it is learned behavior. You have learned it. And the reality is you probably have valid reasons why you don't trust or don't hope or are hesitant to hope. And what I'm telling you is that in areas, it doesn't matter if it's individually or if it's systemic, in areas of learned distrust and disbeliefs, solutions will always and only be temporary because redemption requires relationship. I see this play out again. Marriage is just a great example where people have done everything that was expected to do, but they didn't experience what they thought they would experience when the problem was solved. This depends on performance. How well did you execute? And it centers on what it is that you do. In the kingdom that's governed by his Son, we live in a different system, and it involves redemption. It says that the purposes of one's heart are deep waters. But to be helpful means you have to look and learn and work out and understand in order to draw that thing out towards God's purpose. And this is where it's different. This is where it's different. The purpose, right? And it can be, it's ultimately what to do God's will, to live in relationship with him, be made by God for him. I don't want to nuance that too much. But the way this works is much different. The first thing about understanding purpose or seeing this is connection. You have to learn to connect with a person, to see them, to notice them, to believe in them, to believe that there's dignity and worth. In fact, do you know how many people, probably in this room, certainly in the realms that we run in, they can't tell you a single person in their life who believes in them or values them because they've had to perform their whole life to get where they are. So we have a unique opportunity to do this, to connect with people in ways that are going to actually draw something out of them that they're made for. And so it's connection. And then it's trust. Do you know why this doesn't work? Because even when they do it, you still don't trust that they mean it. You don't know how long it's going to last, and it's only as solid as your capacity to trust. And this operates in the area of trust. It's relational. Trust is the foundation for all relationships. And here's the thing, and I remember learning this with my kids. My oldest daughter was like, when she was first born and you're learning, it's like, what does it mean to be a dad? And there was, there's no internet, so you just feel like, I can figure this out. And this little girl, and I'm like, I'm so moved and deep, like I'm changed by this. And I remember just like, we were sitting there, she was like maybe, I don't know, a year and a half, 2 years old, something, and your brain just fast forwards to when she's 16. I'm going, oh my gosh, she's gonna be 16 and some chump dude is gonna break her heart. And on that day, she's gonna feel worthless, and she's gonna feel, I'm not beautiful, I'm not worthy, and I'm gonna have to grab her little face in my hands and say, oh baby, you are beautiful, and you are worthy, and all those things. And she's gonna have to believe me more than all that she feels. I remember thinking, she's gotta trust me. So if she's gonna trust me at 16, I gotta start back here. And what you're doing is you're always building trust. You're always building trust. You're always building trust. And here's the thing. Some of you are like, okay, build trust. And you're going to build trust so you don't have the right to tell someone what you want to tell them. That's not what I'm saying. Do you know why? Do you know what trust does in a relationship? You ever thought about this? Probably not, just me. You know what trust does? It doesn't give you the right to tell someone, to give them good advice. I trust them, so give me good advice. Trust allows you to enjoy the relationship. Why do you think God wants us to trust him? Why do you think he invites us to walk in him in a manner worthy, pleasing him in all respects? Because when we learn how to trust him, we learn how to enjoy him. When you learn how to trust in friendship, you learn how to enjoy the friendship. Are there hard things? Yes, there are hard things. Do you disagree at times? Yes. When you trust in marriage, what do you think you learn how to do? You learn how to enjoy the relationship. When you learn how to trust in your business partnerships, you learn how to enjoy those relationships. When you learn how to trust, it doesn't matter where this is the work of redemption. But here's the thing. If you're going to invite people to trust you, you got to be trustworthy. You have to walk in a manner that is consistent with the call that God has given to you and to me, to work out this rescue with fear and trembling. I used to have a really bad temper. It's gotten a lot better. I mean, there's still some issues but very few things make me angry as quickly as someone using trust to take advantage of someone or something to get their way. Because you trust is so precious when people give that to you. And to steward it well. And that is our posture. It's part of the reason I feel like God was so faithful to me to be in a place for a long period of time. Because really, and someone after the first service said, there's another component to this. And he said, it's time. And it is. It's trust over time. Begins to bring about a vision for redemption. This kind of help, right? What's fascinating about this section right here becomes formative. When you learn how to live in trusted, formative connections, it focuses on the kind of person that you will become. It is belonging that produces a kind of becoming, that allows us to be helpful with one another, to stay in and to not give up and to not quit and to never lose hope. This isn't strategic. It's not a way to get things to work. But it is intentional to say, Lord, can you give us eyes for the kind of redemptive work you want to do? We must cultivate the kind of compassion that allows us to see this. We need God's work, his Spirit, forming and shaping us, that frees us from the patterns that we are so used to. And instead it frees us to see and to give ourselves to other people and to offer ourselves to reach people and to help them walk with God. To walk in a manner worthy, to walk in a manner that bears God's image with integrity and in his pleasure, bringing beauty and nourishment to others through everything that we do, the work of your hands, your mind, all that you do, faithfully demonstrating and bringing the influence of God's love for the world. It is interesting to me, a lot of us grew up thinking that we're supposed to change the world. And God has actually commanded us to love the world. And it is in loving the world that we actually trust that his love is what actually changes us. And it's our job to be helpful to that end. Right? Could we see people differently and arrange and extend ourselves to be helpful, to learn how to build connections and trust and become the kind of people for whom this is normal, right? That's what we're trying to do. Father, there's so much I want to say and add. I just ask that you would give us eyes, a vision for redemption. Some of us have been thinking a particular way for so long that this idea of redemption, we even overlay our own thoughts on it. Would you help us to see what you see? Would you shape our hearts to more closely reflect your love for the world around us? And Father, would you allow our lives, even as we're going through things, to be helpful, to be helped, that we become the kind of people that bear witness to the kind of God that you are. And I ask all this in the name of your Son, Jesus, who is our King. Amen.